You know the worst part about being a medic? Lieutenant Harper tossed a blood-stained glove into the biohazard bin. Everyone claims to respect the Geneva suggestions, but the moment things get dicey, guess who gets shot first? Commander Torres snorted, the sound echoing in the sterile medbay of the UNSV Mercy. Geneva suggestions. That's cute. Pretty sure Earth is the only civilization that even tried to codify, please don't be complete monsters during wartime. Fat lot of good it did us. Harper finished bandaging the unconscious Zilthori soldier on her table. One of the enemy, but in her bay, everyone was just a patient. I've got 3 staff in critical after that last assault, and those Caridian bastards knew exactly what they were doing. The ship's markings were clear as day. The Mercy had been dispatched to the front lines of humanity's latest interstellar clusterfuck, a conflict that began, as they often do, with a misunderstanding, and escalated, as they always do, into a multi-species political hellscape. Earth and its allies against the Caridian Collective and their vassals. Torres checked her tablet and grimaced. High Command just confirmed. The Caridians hit 3 more medical vessels in the Epsilon sector. No survivors. Jesus. Harper's shoulders slumped. That's over 500 medical personnel. Gone. That's not all. Torres lowered her voice, though the only others in earshot were unconscious patients. I heard a rumor from my contact at Command. They're considering options. Options? What options? We're a medical ship, not a warship. Torres's expression darkened. Not us. Earth. They're talking about deploying the Archangels. Harper felt her blood run cold. The Archangels. Earth's dirty little secret, the soldiers they pretended didn't exist. The ones they kept locked away on a prison moon, because even in war, there were lines that shouldn't be crossed, and these men and women had tap-danced over those lines while humming cheerful tunes. They can't be serious. The Accords specifically. Harper, they targeted medical ships. 5 of them now. The Accords are already in tatters. Harper stared at the alien on her table. Blue blood, 6 limbs, completely different biochemistry. But still, just a scared soldier with a family somewhere. If Earth deploys the Archangels, this won't be a war anymore. It'll be a massacre. Torres nodded grimly. That's rather the point. Admiral Jackson Vega had been in the military for 37 years. He'd fought in the Martian rebellions, commanded ships against the Zilthori in the Battle of Proxima, and helped negotiate the Treaty of Tau Ceti that had brought a decade of relative peace to human space. He'd seen humanity at its best and at its worst, but he'd never had to make a decision like this. The Council has authorized it, then? He asked, looking at the holographic faces of Earth's Security Council arrayed before him. Unanimously, replied Counselor Wu. The Caridians' actions constitute a clear violation of the Interstellar Humanitarian Accords. They've targeted our medical corps specifically and repeatedly. And diplomacy has failed, added Counselor Ivanova, her weathered face grave. Their Archon refuses all communication. Vega nodded slowly. You understand what you're authorizing? The Archangels aren't conventional soldiers. We understand perfectly well, Admiral, said Counselor Okafor, his deep voice resonating with barely contained anger. The Caridians believe we are weak because we adhere to rules of engagement. They think our compassion makes us vulnerable. It's time they learned why we created those rules in the first place. It wasn't to protect our enemies, finished Counselor Martinez quietly. It was to protect them from us. Vega looked down at the authorization code glowing on his terminal. With a single command, he would unleash the most dangerous soldiers humanity had ever produced. Individuals so effective at dealing death that Earth had collectively decided to lock them away, both for their crimes and for the greater good of the galaxy. Very well. Vega pressed his palm to the scanner, feeling the weight of history on his shoulders. Authorization accepted. Operation Righteous Fury is now active. God help us all. On a barren moon orbiting Jupiter, deep within a facility known officially as Rehabilitation Center Omega, and unofficially as Monsters Keep, alarms began to sound. Chachunin. Rise and shine, Colonel. You've been pardoned. Colonel Alexander Drake opened his eyes to see the familiar face of his jailer, Warden Prescott, standing outside the energy barrier of his cell. In the 8 years Drake had been imprisoned here, Prescott had never once smiled at him. Today he was showing teeth. Pardoned? Drake sat up on his bunk, suspicion evident in his voice. His cell was spartian but not uncomfortable. A bunk, a desk with limited access to approved reading materials, a small washroom. Better than he deserved by most accounts. Why do I find that hard to believe? Not pardoned exactly. Prescott clarified, deactivating the barrier. More like temporarily unleashed, with conditions. Ah. Drake nodded, understanding immediately. Someone broke the rules, and now they want the people who never played by them in the first place. Medical ships. The Caridians hit 5 of them. Over 2,000 personnel and patients dead. Drake's face hardened. Even among the monsters of the Special Operations Tactical Unit known as the Archangels, there had been lines they wouldn't cross. Medical personnel were off limits. Children were off limits. Surrender was respected. All of us? He asked. The whole unit. All 12 of you that are left. Drake stood, stretching muscles maintained by a rigorous daily exercise regimen despite his confinement. Terms? Prescott handed him a tablet. Full reinstatement of rank. Command of your unit. Access to whatever resources you require, in exchange for your service. In this specific conflict, your sentence will be commuted to time served. And if I refuse, then you continue your sentence. This isn't conscription, Colonel. It's an opportunity. Drake scanned the mission parameters on the tablet. The Caridian Collective. 3 core worlds, 17 colonies. Advanced technology but relatively new to interstellar conflict. Arrogant, entitled, convinced of their superiority. And now they were targeting medical ships. Who else is coming out to play? Drake asked, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear it. Prescott's expression was grim. All of them. Martinez, Kowalski, the Yamamoto twins. Patia, O'Neill, Dubois, LeBlanc, Petrov, Zhang, and Falcone. Drake let out a low whistle. You're letting Falcone out? This really is serious. The Council wants to send a message. Oh, we'll send a message, all right. Drake handed the tablet back. I accept the mission. When do we start? Now, your team is waiting in the briefing room. As Drake followed Prescott through the pristine white corridors of Monsters Keep, he felt a familiar sensation stirring in his chest, something between excitement and dread. The Archangels had been imprisoned because they were too good at what they did, and what they did wasn't very nice. The Caridians had just made a terrible mistake. They'd broken the rules against the one species that had created rules specifically to prevent themselves from doing what came naturally. And now the rules no longer applied. Chupki! The briefing room fell silent as Drake entered. 11 pairs of eyes turned to him. Some wary, some excited, all deadly. These weren't just soldiers. They were weapons in human form, each specialized in their own brand of destruction. Look what the cat dragged in, drawled Major Sofia Martinez, her feet propped up on the conference table. The demolitions expert had a gleam in her eye that Drake remembered all too well. The band's back together, boss. Not by choice, replied Captain Nikolai Petrov, the team's sniper. His face remained as impassive as ever, but Drake could see the tension in his shoulders. Some of us were almost up for parole. Speak for yourself, laughed Lieutenant Isabelle Dubois, the infiltration specialist. Another 20 years minimum for me. This is practically a get-out-of-jail-free card. Drake took his position at the head of the table, studying each of his former, and now current, team members. They'd been the best Special Forces unit ever assembled, with a success rate that approached mythical status. They'd also committed acts that haunted the nightmares of their enemies, and sometimes their allies. I assume you've all been briefed on the situation, Drake said, activating the holographic display in the center of the table. A star map appeared, highlighting Caridian territory. The Caridians have been targeting our medical ships. 5 vessels destroyed, over 2,000 casualties. High Command has authorized our deployment. Full autonomy? Asked Major James O'Neill, the team's tactical specialist. Within the combat zone, yes. We have access to whatever resources we need. One restriction. Drake looked pointedly around the table. We focus on military targets, no civilians. The Caridians didn't extend that courtesy to our medics, growled Lieutenant Commander Akira Yamamoto, one of the twin weapon specialists. Which makes us better than them, Drake replied firmly. We're monsters, not animals. We still have a code. There were nods around the table. Even at their worst, the Archangels had operated with a twisted sense of honor. What's the objective? Asked Captain Rajiv Bhatia, the team's electronic warfare expert. Drake expanded the hologram to show the Caridian fleet deployments. Primary objective is to force a surrender by any means necessary. Secondary objective is to recover any surviving medical personnel if possible. And the approach? This from Captain Elena Falcone, whose specialty in psychological warfare had earned her the longest sentence of anyone in the room. Her methods had been effective, innovative, and horrifying even by Archangel standards. Drake smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. They expect us to follow rules of engagement. We're going to show them why we created those rules in the first place. Shock and awe, nodded Lieutenant Commander Kai Yamamoto, Akira's twin brother. Precisely. Drake zoomed in on a specific location, a heavily fortified Caridian military outpost. We start here, the 47th Caridian Fleet Group's command station. Intelligence suggests they coordinated the attacks on our medical ships from this location. Frontal assault? Asked Captain Victor Kowalski, the heavy weapons specialist. Drake shook his head. Infiltration, then internal chaos. Dubois, Zhang, and Falcone will go in first. Once they've compromised their communications and security, the rest of us follow. We take control of their command systems, extract all tactical data, then leave a message. What kind of message? Asked Lieutenant Min Zhang, her expression curious. Drake's smile widened. The kind that travels faster than light. The kind that makes the rest of their military think twice before engaging us again. The team exchanged looks, some uncertain, others eager. They were war criminals by any reasonable definition, but they were also soldiers who had sworn to protect humanity. The Caridians had crossed a line, and now Earth was responding by crossing one of its own. One last thing, Drake added, his voice growing serious. We've been in prison for years. Some of you might be rusty. Some of you might be eager to let loose. Control yourselves. We're not here for revenge or pleasure. We're here to end a threat to humanity as efficiently as possible. Understood, Colonel, replied Lieutenant Commander Celeste LeBlanc, the team's medic, and despite her imprisonment, one of the finest trauma surgeons in the fleet. We're professionals, after all. Professionals with psychological evaluations that would make a serial killer blush, muttered Petrov, but there was a hint of dark humor in his voice. Drake nodded. We deploy in 6 hours. Gear up, review the intel, and remember, we might be monsters, but we're humanity's monsters. Let's remind the galaxy why that distinction matters. As the team dispersed to prepare, Drake found himself wondering if Earth would be able to put them back in their cages once this was over. Sometimes, when you unleash a monster to fight your battles, you discover too late that the monster enjoys its freedom. But that was a problem for another day. Right now, the Caridians needed to learn a painful lesson about human nature, and the Archangels were about to become their most brutal teachers. Depish. The Caridian command station was a marvel of engineering, a massive structure orbiting a gas giant in the Epsilon 9 system. Its elegant, curved architecture reflected the Caridians' aesthetic sensibilities, with sweeping spires and iridescent hull plating that shimmered in the light of the nearby star. It was beautiful, thought Drake as he observed it through the viewport of their stealth insertion craft. It was also about to become a cautionary tale. Status report, he said quietly into his comm. Infiltration team is aboard, came Dubois's whispered reply. We've accessed their environmental systems. Security protocols have been amended, ready to receive the primary team. Casualties? 4 security personnel. A pause. They didn't suffer, Colonel. Drake nodded, though she couldn't see him. Even now the Archangels maintained certain standards. Proceed with Phase 2. We're inbound. Their insertion craft, a modified stealth shuttle with technology that was officially classified as theoretical, slipped through the Caridian defense grid as if it weren't there. The station's sensors, compromised by Zhang's electronic intrusion, registered nothing as they docked at an auxiliary maintenance port. 8 armored figures moved silently through the access corridor, their specialized combat suits a dull matte black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Each carried an arsenal of weapons, some standard issue, others modified or entirely custom-built during their brief preparation time. Split into teams as planned, Drake ordered as they reached a junction. O'Neill, take Martinez and Kowalski to the power core. Yamamoto twins, secure the communications hub. Patia, LeBlanc, with me to command. Petrov, find your perch and cover our exit. The teams separated with practiced efficiency. Drake led his group through corridors where unconscious Caridian personnel lay slumped at their stations, victims of a modified nerve agent that Dubois had introduced through the environmental system. Non-lethal, but they'd wake with hellish headaches and fractured memories. Some might consider that mercy. Drake knew better. They'd left these ones alive as witnesses. When they reached the command center, they found Falcone already there, sitting casually in what appeared to be the commander's chair. Around her, Caridian officers lay unconscious, except for one, a high-ranking individual judging by his elaborate uniform, restrained and very much awake, his 4 eyes wide with a combination of outrage and fear. Colonel, Falcone greeted with a predatory smile. I've been getting acquainted with Fleet Commander Vkr'lak. He's been most informative about their military protocols. The Caridian commander hissed something in his native language that the translators rendered as a particularly creative anatomical suggestion. Charming, Drake commented, approaching the commander. Fleet Commander, I am Colonel Alexander Drake of Earth's Special Operations Division. You have attacked and destroyed 5 of our medical vessels. This constitutes a war crime under the Interstellar Humanitarian Accords, which your government signed. Your vessels were carrying weapons, the Caridian spat. We intercepted communications. Medical equipment, corrected LeBlanc, moving to one of the consoles. If your intelligence was competent enough to decode the actual manifests instead of just the shipping codes, you'd have realized that Type 7 cellular reconstruction units are regenerative medical pods, not weapons. The commander's secondary breathing slits fluttered, a sign of uncertainty in Caridians. Our intelligence was clear. Your intelligence was wrong. Drake cut him off. And now you're going to help us send a message to the rest of your fleet. I will do no such thing, Vkr'lak declared. Falcone leaned closer to the commander, her voice dropping to a silky whisper. Oh, I think you will. You see, we've accessed your personal files, including the location of your family estate on Kirid Prime. Such a lovely compound. 3 mates, 8 offspring. The youngest just starting education, aren't they? The commander's skin paled from its normal copper tone to something approaching ash. You wouldn't. Earth adheres to the rules of warfare, Drake interrupted, his voice cold. But we're not exactly Earth's most rule-abiding representatives. We're what Earth keeps locked away precisely because we don't play nice. The humans have a saying, Patya added, working at another console. Rules of war are made by people who understand just how horrible humans can be when there are no rules. Drake nodded to Falcone, who activated the station's communication system. Channel open, Colonel. Broadcasting to all Caridian military frequencies. Drake stepped forward, facing the pickup. This is Colonel Alexander Drake of Earth's Special Forces. Your command station at Epsilon 9 is now under our control. Your fleet commander Vkr'lak is our prisoner. In response to your attacks on our medical vessels, Earth has authorized unrestricted warfare against Caridian military assets. He paused, letting the gravity of his next words sink in. We are the Archangels, Earth's darkest weapons. We were imprisoned because even our own people feared what we are capable of. Now we have been released, with only one restriction. Civilian targets are off limits. Drake's voice hardened. Your military, however, enjoys no such protection. You have 24 Earth Standard Hours to recall all forces from human space and issue a formal surrender. After that, we will systematically dismantle your military capability, using methods you cannot imagine. He nodded to Patya, who transmitted a data packet through the same channel. We have just sent you archived footage of our previous operations before our imprisonment. This is not a bluff. This is not a negotiation. This is mercy, the only mercy you will receive. Drake leaned closer to the pickup. Attack another medical ship, and we will visit upon your military such horrors that your species will tell stories of us for 1,000 years. He cut the transmission with a gesture and turned to the Caridian commander. We're leaving now. You'll remain here alive to relay our message in person. Your station will remain operational, but your weapons and propulsion systems have been disabled. You cannot do this, the commander stammered. The other species in the Galactic Concord will never allow. The other species, Drake said quietly, are precisely why Earth created and enforced rules of warfare in the first place. They know what we're capable of. That's why they agreed to the accord so readily. Martinez's voice came through the comm system. Charges set at the power core, Colonel. Ready to detonate on your command. Non-critical systems only, Drake confirmed. We want them scared, not dead. Not yet. Understood. Timer set for our departure plus 10 minutes. Drake gave a final nod to the Caridian commander. Remember what I said. 24 hours. As they departed, leaving a station full of unconscious Caridians and one terrified commander, LeBlanc fell into step beside Drake. You know they'll never believe we'd actually do all those things. Drake glanced at her. Won't they? Falcone made sure the commander saw exactly the right historical footage. The Ganymede incident, the Tau Ceti insurrection. Those reports were classified, heavily exaggerated. Were they? Drake asked quietly. Or were they sanitized for public consumption? LeBlanc didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both knew the truth. Sometimes the monster under the bed is real, and sometimes it wears a human face. The archangels withdrew as silently as they had arrived, leaving behind only the certainty that humanity's tolerance had limits, and those limits had been reached. The Curidian High Command received the transmission with initial skepticism. The footage, however, quickly dispelled any notion that this was a standard human military operation. What they witnessed was methodical, calculated savagery executed with surgical precision. "These cannot be humans," insisted Military Archon Zevmor, the highest-ranking Kyridian military leader. "These must be fabrications." Fleet Admiral Tecresse, who had fought against humans in the early border skirmishes, slowly shook her head. "No, these are humans. They're worse, perhaps, but humans nonetheless. How can a species create such rigid ethical frameworks and harbor such creatures?" asked another commander. "Because," Tecresse replied quietly, "they created those frameworks precisely because they know what they are capable of becoming." The debate raged for hours, but as reports of other Curidian military outposts experiencing similar infiltrations trickled in, some with more casualties, others with critical systems completely destroyed, the reality became impossible to ignore. The humans had unleashed something terrible. With 4 hours remaining in the ultimatum, the Curidian conclave voted to accept the terms. A formal surrender was drafted and transmitted on all frequencies. Chepi. Lieutenant Harper was tending to patients in the medbay of the UNSV Mercy when the news came through. The Curidians had surrendered, accepting all of Earth's terms, including reparations for the destroyed medical ships and a formal apology for the tragic miscommunication. Commander Torres entered the medbay, her expression unreadable. "It's over. They surrendered." Harper looked up from her patient, a young human ensign with plasma burns across his chest. "Just like that? After all this?" "Not just like that." Torres lowered her voice. "They deployed them, the archangels." Harper felt a chill run down her spine. "What did they do?" "That's the thing," Torres replied, looking troubled. "As far as we know, they didn't do much of anything. Infiltrated some installations, delivered a message, demonstrated capabilities, minimal casualties." "Then why?" "Because of what they showed the Kyridians. Archived footage from their previous operations, before they were imprisoned." Harper finished bandaging the ensign and moved to wash her hands. "Are the rumors true, then? About why they were locked away?" Torres shrugged. "I don't know. But whatever the Curidians saw was enough to make them surrender unconditionally within 20 hours. The medical bay door slid open, and a group entered. 12 individuals in nondescript military uniforms without insignia or rank. At their head was a tall man with prematurely gray hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Lieutenant Harper?" the man asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I'm Colonel Drake. My team and I were told there are wounded here who need evacuation." Harper stared at him, recognition dawning. These were them, the archangels. They looked so normal. Not the monsters of rumor and speculation, just tired soldiers. "Yes," she managed, gesturing to the critical care units. "We have 7 critical cases that need transfer to the main medical facility at Arcturus Station." Drake nodded, turning to a woman beside him. "LeBlanc, assess the patients. Kowalski, prep the shuttle for medical transport. The rest of you, secure the perimeter." As the team dispersed to their tasks, Drake remained, his gaze meeting Harper's. "You're wondering why they sent us for a medical evacuation?" It wasn't a question, but Harper nodded anyway. "Because," Drake said softly, "before we were weapons, we were soldiers. And this, protecting the wounded, defending the healers, this is what soldiers are supposed to do." "But the Curidians?" "Surrendered because they saw what happens when humanity stops following its own rules." Drake's expression darkened momentarily. "We remind everyone why those rules exist in the first place." As the archangels efficiently prepared the wounded for transport, Harper found herself working alongside them, witnessing not brutality but practiced care. These were the monsters that Earth kept locked away, yet here they were, handling injured soldiers with gentle competence. "You know what the worst part of being an archangel is?" Drake asked her suddenly as they stabilized a patient for transport. Harper looked up, surprised. "What?" "Everyone forgets why we do what we do." He secured an IV line with practiced ease. "We're not sadists, we're not psychopaths. We're the people willing to cross lines so that others don't have to. We bear that burden so humanity can pretend it's better than it is." "Are you saying humanity isn't better than that?" Harper challenged. Drake gave her a sad smile. "I'm saying humanity created rules of warfare because humans, more than any other species we've encountered, understand just how terrible war can be when there are no rules. We've had thousands of years to perfect inflicting suffering on each other. The Geneva Conventions weren't created by a peaceful species. They were created by a species that had mastered warfare so completely that it frightened itself. Harper considered this as they worked, the words settling uncomfortably in her mind. And you, after this is over? Back to our cells, most likely. Drake shrugged. That's the deal. We serve, we return to confinement. Earth needs its monsters kept safely locked away, until the next time someone forgets why the rules exist. As the last patient was loaded for transport, Harper watched the Archangels board their shuttle. Efficient, professional. Nothing like the demons of her imagination. Just soldiers doing their duty, carrying a burden few could understand. Commander Torres joined her as the shuttle departed. Strange, isn't it? To think those are the people Earth fears most. Not strange at all, Harper replied, understanding finally dawning. They're not locked away because Earth fears them. They're locked away because Earth fears what they represent. The part of humanity that exists in all of us. The part we try to pretend isn't there. Torres nodded slowly. The capacity for calculated violence. No, Harper corrected, watching the shuttle disappear into the starfield. The willingness to do whatever it takes to protect our own. The Caridians thought our rules made us weak. They just discovered those rules weren't for them. They were for us. She turned back to her medbay, to the work of healing that would continue regardless of politics or war. They attacked our medical corps, and Earth released the war criminals. But the real message wasn't in what those war criminals did. It was in what they could have done, Torres finished, but chose not to. Exactly. Harper nodded. And that, Commander, is humanity's most terrifying weapon. The choice. We choose to be better, until we don't. In the silence of space, the Archangel's shuttle accelerated toward their next assignment, carrying wounded soldiers to safety. Monsters by definition, heroes by action, and the living embodiment of humanity's oldest warning. Be careful whom you provoke. Some species created rules of warfare not to protect their enemies, but to protect their enemies from them. Chao. In a secure facility on Earth, Admiral Vega received the final report on Operation Righteous Fury. The Archangels performed as expected, sir, his aide summarized. Minimal casualties, maximum psychological impact. The Caridians have fully withdrawn from all contested territories and agreed to reparations. And the team? En route to Jupiter Moon facility for reintegration to the containment program. Vega nodded, staring out at the peaceful Earth landscape beyond his window. They go back willingly? Yes, sir. Colonel Drake reported that the monsters are returning to their cages, as promised. Vega sighed, feeling the weight of his decision. Do you know why we keep them imprisoned, Lieutenant? Because they're war criminals, sir. Their methods... No, Vega interrupted. We keep them imprisoned because they remind us of what we really are, beneath our civilization and our rules. They are humanity with the mask removed, efficient, ruthless, and terrifyingly good at violence. He turned from the window. Schedule a full psychological evaluation for each of them. Make sure they understand that their service has been noted and appreciated, and arrange for improved conditions at the facility. Sir? Better quarters, more privileges. They're still prisoners, but they've earned some comfort. Vega's expression was solemn. We keep the monsters locked away, Lieutenant, but we should never forget that there are monsters, created by us, for us. The least we can do is acknowledge their sacrifice. Yes, sir. After his aide departed, Vega remained at the window, contemplating the stars that were just becoming visible in the evening sky. Out there, countless species now understood something fundamental about humanity, that its civility was a choice, not a weakness. It wasn't a comfortable thought, but it was a necessary reminder. Peace through strength was an ancient concept, but humanity had refined it to an art form. Peace through the capacity for unspeakable violence, carefully restrained, until it wasn't. The end. I still don't understand why you're freaking out. I just reacted, okay? Captain Alexandra Novak shrugged, reaching for her coffee mug with a casual indifference that made Admiral Zektar's upper appendages twitch in agitation. You just reacted by hurling yourself across a diplomatic table, tackling an armed Vrexian assassin, dislocating 3 of his strike limbs, and then apologizing for spilling the punch bowl. The 8-foot-tall arthropoid admiral's voice modulator couldn't quite capture the particular blend of awe and exasperation he was attempting to convey. Alex took a long, deliberate sip of her coffee. The punch was really good. Seemed like a waste. The admiral's compound eyes flickered through a rapid spectrum shift that human xenologists had come to recognize as the Ziknari equivalent of an eye roll. Captain Novak, I'm beginning to think your species doesn't fully comprehend what diplomatic attaché actually means. It means I was attached to the diplomat when I tackled him out of the line of fire. Alex replied with a grin that somehow managed to be both insubordinate and charming. Technically accurate. In the 6 standard galactic months since humanity had been welcomed into the Confederated systems, the various member species had been struggling to categorize their newest allies. Humans didn't fit neatly into any of the established evolutionary paradigms that shaped galactic politics. They weren't apex predators like the Vkr'lakians, though they showed alarming predatory capabilities when threatened. They weren't hive-oriented like the Ziknari, though they formed intensely loyal social groups. They weren't pacifistic philosophers like the Eldarin, though they could engage in abstract ethical discussions for hours. And they certainly weren't coldly logical like the silicon-based Tetrites, though they could calculate risk with remarkable precision when necessary. Humans, it seemed, were a baffling evolutionary grab bag of contradictory traits that left the Galactic Xenobiological Classification Committee in a perpetual state of bureaucratic gridlock. And no human trait caused more confusion than what Admiral Zektar was currently attempting to document in his official incident report: their utterly unpredictable combat reflexes. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, the Admiral continued, mandibles clicking in concentration as he reviewed the security footage for the 12th time. You were standing approximately 4.3 meters away from Ambassador Williams when you, and I'm quoting the Eldarin witness here, moved with such sudden violence that several attendees experienced momentary stress-induced molting. Alex shrugged again. I saw the Vkr'lakians' poison glands swell. It's this little purple thing behind their mandibles that kind of, she gestured vaguely around her jaw, puffs up right before they spit. We covered it in xenobiology training. That's impossible, the Admiral stated flatly. The glandular pre-ejection phase of Vkr'lakian toxin deployment lasts approximately 0.27 seconds. No non-augmented organic being has reaction time sufficient to— Yeah, well, we get weird about that stuff, Alex interrupted, finishing her coffee and placing the mug on the Admiral's desk with a decisive clink. Look, my roommate in the academy once woke me up by surprising me and I broke her nose. Completely by accident. Something in our brains just flips a switch. The Admiral's antenna drooped slightly. Wait, you injured a nestmate through autonomic defensive response? We call them roommates, but yeah. Sent her flying across the room before I was even fully awake. Felt terrible about it afterward. Alex frowned at the memory. Bought her drinks for a month. Admiral Zektar made a note in his report, then hesitated. Captain, you realize this information suggests humans may constitute a Level 3 autonomous threat under Confederated safety protocols? Alex laughed. Trust me, Admiral. If that were true, our own planet would have implemented containment protocols for us centuries ago. We've learned to control it, mostly. 3 weeks later, Lieutenant Commander Jackson Blackwood was attempting to explain to a panel of increasingly disturbed xenopsychologists why he had reflexively caught a falling Tetrite diplomat, despite the fact that the silicon-based lifeform weighed approximately 440 pounds. I didn't really think about it, Jackson explained, flexing his bandaged hands. The emergency medical staff had managed to repair most of the microfractures in his metacarpals and phalanges, but the deep tissue bruising would take at least another day to fully heal. I just saw Ambassador Keyes TK stumble, and well, you don't let people fall. Dr. Thelzara, the head of the Confederate Xenopsychology Institute, made a sound that her translator rendered as a puzzled hum. But surely you understood the physical impossibility of what you were attempting. The mass differential alone should have prevented any impulse toward intervention. Jackson's expression turned sheepish. Ma'am, with all due respect, when humans see someone falling, our brains don't exactly stop to do the math. The Eldarin doctor to Dr. Thelzara's left leaned forward, membranes glistening with scholarly excitement. Fascinating. So this was not a combat reflex per se, but rather some form of preservation instinct directed toward another being, regardless of its utility or logical outcome. I guess? Jackson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Look, I'm a navigation specialist, not a psychologist. I just didn't want the ambassador to crack his crystalline matrix on the deck plating. We were taught that tetrites are pretty brittle around their lower nodes. And you calculated you could prevent this outcome despite sustaining personal injury? The Eldarin pressed.
I didn't calculate anything, Jackson insisted.
I just reacted. The panel exchanged glances that transcended species barriers in their collective bafflement.
Commander Blackwood, Dr. Thelzara said finally, would you be willing to participate in a series of reflex evaluation scenarios? Purely for research purposes, of course. Jackson's expression immediately turned wary.
What kind of scenarios are we talking about?
You want me to what now?
Lieutenant Emma Torres stared incredulously at the research proposal displayed on her datapad. Dr. Vkr'lak, the Zikanari neurophysiologist who had been assigned as her liaison to the Confederate Research Division, waved his primary manipulators in what humans had come to recognize as an apologetic gesture.
It's purely voluntary, of course, Lieutenant. But after the incidents with Captain Novak and Commander Blackwood, the Confederated Systems Defense Council has expressed, let's call it scholarly interest, in human reflexive capabilities. Emma skimmed through the document again, her eyebrows climbing higher with each paragraph.
So let me get this straight. You want to throw things at me, startle me with loud noises, and simulate various threatening scenarios, all while I'm hooked up to a neural scanner?
That's a rather reductive summary, but essentially correct, Dr. Vkr'lak admitted.
We would, of course, ensure no lasting harm comes to you.
Gee, thanks, Emma muttered. And what exactly is the Confederacy hoping to learn from this? What are you calling it? Reflex Combat Integration Initiative? The Zeknari's color patterns shifted in a way that Emma had learned indicated mild embarrassment. There are some among the Defense Council who believe human reflexive capabilities might represent a significant tactical advantage in certain combat scenarios. Emma's eyes narrowed. You want to weaponize our jumpiness?
I wouldn't put it quite so. Because trust me, Doc, if that's the goal, you'd be better off just startling Petty Officer Ramirez during movie night. Last week, someone dropped a snack container during a horror film and he accidentally punched Lieutenant Kim right out of his seat. The neurophysiologist's color patterns cycled rapidly through shades of surprise and intense interest.
Was Lieutenant Kim injured?
Emma sighed heavily.
No, he landed on Ensign O'Malley, who spilled his drink on Commander Wilson, who then... Look, it doesn't matter. The point is, our reactions aren't exactly precision instruments.
Nevertheless, Dr. Vkr'lak persisted. The statistical anomalies in human reaction time and force application under threat conditions cannot be ignored. Some of your reflexive responses bypass your neural processing centers entirely, routing directly through your spinal column. It's quite remarkable. Yeah, well, evolving on a planet where pretty much everything was trying to eat us will do that. Emma replied dryly.
Indeed, which is precisely why... Fine, Emma interrupted, handing the datapad back to the scientist.
I'll do your tests. But I want it on record that I think this is a terrible idea.
Dr. Vkr'lak's color patterns brightened with pleasure.
Duly noted, Lieutenant. We'll begin tomorrow at 0800. Please wear comfortable attire suitable for physical activity. As the Zeknari departed, Emma muttered under her breath. This is going to end with someone getting punched in the face. I just know it. She was right. 3 days later, Admiral Zikatar found himself reviewing yet another incident report, this one bearing the ominous title, Unexpected Outcomes in Human Reflex Testing, Case Study 17B. Doctor, the Admiral addressed the rather rumpled-looking Zeknari scientist on his view screen. Would you care to explain why one of our most respected Vrexian combat instructors is currently in medical bay, with what the report describes as comprehensive mandibular displacement? Dr. Vkr'lak's color patterns were locked in the dull, ashy tones of profound professional regret.
There was a procedural oversight, Admiral. Procedural oversight, the Admiral repeated flatly.
Yes, sir. You see, we had been gradually escalating the stimulus intensity across the testing scenarios, but we failed to adequately account for the human sleep cycle's effect on reflex modulation. The Admiral's antennae twitched in confusion.
Explain.
Lieutenant Torres had been on duty for approximately 19 standard hours prior to the final test series. According to human physiological norms, this placed her in a state of sleep deprivation, which we now understand significantly amplifies their already remarkable reflex responses, while simultaneously reducing their cognitive filtering capabilities. And no one thought to check this before allowing Combat Master Vrexkar to simulate an ambush scenario. The scientist's colors shifted to an even deeper shade of mortification. We believed the safety protocols were sufficient.
Clearly, the Admiral replied dryly. And how did Lieutenant Torres respond to this incident? She was quite distressed, actually, insisted on accompanying Combat Master Vkr'lak to medical bay and apologized profusely. She then submitted a formal request to terminate her participation in the research program, citing, and I quote, "I literally told you this would happen, you absolute walnut." Admiral Ziktar's translator struggled momentarily with the final idiom before rendering it as a general insult. I see. And the Defense Council's position on these developments? Dr. Vaknor hesitated. There is divided opinion, sir. Some find the results concerning, while others are more interested than ever in the potential applications. Of course they are. The Admiral sighed, a sound his vocal apparatus wasn't actually designed to make, but which he had adopted after extensive contact with human officers. Thank you, Doctor. Please ensure your full findings are submitted to my office by the end of the cycle. After terminating the communication, Admiral Ziktar stared thoughtfully at the frozen image on his display. Lieutenant Torres, moving at such speed that the high-resolution camera had barely captured more than a blur, her expression a fascinating mixture of surprise, determination, and what the xenopsychologists were terming reflexive aggression posturing. The most troubling part, the Admiral reflected, was that according to the timestamp, this image was captured a full 0.32 seconds before the combat instructor had even fully emerged from his concealed position. She had reacted to a threat she couldn't possibly have consciously perceived. Captain So let me get this straight, Captain Novak said, leaning against the wall of Lieutenant Torres's quarters with an amused expression. You broke the mandible of the Confederacy's most decorated Vrexian combat instructor? Emma groaned, burying her face in her hands. Don't remind me, I feel terrible. I heard they had to call in a specialist from the Vrexian homeworld to reset it properly. Jackson added from his perch on Emma's desk chair, looking far too entertained by the whole situation. Guys, seriously, it's not funny, Emma protested. I could have really hurt him, and now the Defense Council is talking about human reflexive integration protocols or some nonsense. Alex's expression sobered slightly. Yeah, I got called in for a meeting about that yesterday. Apparently, they're considering creating a special human response unit for high-risk diplomatic situations. You've got to be kidding me, Emma said. They want to use us as, what, reflexive bodyguards? Pretty much, Alex confirmed. The way Admiral Ziktar explained it, they're fascinated by our ability to respond to threats before our conscious minds have even processed them. Turns out that's pretty rare among confederated species. Jackson frowned. But it's not like we can control it. That's the whole point of a reflex. It happens automatically. Exactly what I told them, Alex agreed. But they seem to think it can be channeled or directed with the right training. Emma flopped back on her bunk with a dramatic sigh. Great. So now instead of being explorers and diplomats, they want to turn us into some kind of twitchy organic security system. Look on the bright side, Jackson offered. At least they're not classifying us as a threat species anymore. Both women turned to stare at him. They were classifying us as a what? Emma demanded. Jackson winced. You didn't know? After Alex's little diplomatic table diving incident, there was apparently some discussion about whether humans should be classified as a Level 3 autonomous threat species. You know, the kind that requires special containment protocols. Alex snorted. That's ridiculous. We're not dangerous. Says the woman who tackled an armed assassin and dislocated 3 of his limbs on reflex, Emma pointed out. That was different. He was trying to kill someone. And I was half asleep when they had a Vrexian jump out at me. Neither of us was trying to hurt anyone. It just happened. Jackson raised his hands in a placating gesture. Which is exactly the point. The Confederacy doesn't know what to do with a species that can accidentally dislocate someone's mandible when startled. It doesn't fit their understanding of sentient behavior. A thoughtful silence fell over the room, broken only when Alex straightened up suddenly, a speculative gleam in her eye. You know, she said slowly, maybe we're looking at this all wrong. Emma eyed her suspiciously. What do you mean? Well, they're fascinated by our reflexes, right? They think it gives us some kind of edge? Yes, Jackson replied cautiously, clearly recognizing the particular tone in Alex's voice that typically preceded either a brilliant idea or a court-martial-worthy disaster. So what if we lean into it? Not as weapons or security, but as a unique human contribution to the Confederacy. Emma sat up. I'm listening. 2 weeks later,
Admiral Vkr'lak found himself observing what the humans had termed a demonstration exhibition in one of the station's larger training facilities. At Captain Novak's insistence, representatives from every major confederated species were in attendance, including several members of the Defense Council and even a few diplomats who had been reluctantly persuaded to attend. "Captain," the Admiral addressed Alex, as she made final adjustments to what appeared to be a complex obstacle course dominating the center of the facility. "Would you care to explain exactly what we're about to witness?" Alex straightened up with a grin. "Admiral, today you're going to see what human reflexes are actually good for." Before he could press for clarification, the facility's announcement system chimed, and Lieutenant Torres's voice echoed through the chamber. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored representatives of all Confederate species, welcome to the first human adaptive response demonstration. Today, we'll be showcasing the practical applications of human reflexive capabilities in non-combat scenarios." The assembled aliens murmured among themselves, their curiosity evident in postures and vocalizations that transcended species barriers. "Our first demonstration," Emma continued, "will focus on emergency response and rescue operations." At that cue, Jackson entered the facility wearing standard human athletic attire rather than his uniform. He approached the obstacle course, which the Admiral now noticed had been set up to resemble a collapsed structure with various hazards and simulated victims, represented by weighted mannequins, scattered throughout. "Commander Blackwood will now demonstrate human reflexive capabilities in a disaster scenario," Emma announced. "Computer, initiate emergency response simulation alpha, difficulty level 8. What followed was, to the collective audience of alien dignitaries, nothing short of astonishing. As the simulation began, sections of the obstacle course began to shift unpredictably. Panels slid, barriers dropped, and various objects fell or moved in patterns designed to be completely random. Jackson navigated the chaos with a fluid grace that seemed incongruous with normal human movement patterns. He caught falling debris before it struck the mannequins, contorted his body through impossibly narrow gaps that opened and closed in seconds, and repeatedly made split-second decisions that prioritized the victims without any apparent conscious deliberation. When a section of flooring unexpectedly gave way beneath a mannequin, Jackson dove, rolled, and somehow caught it one-handed, while simultaneously stabilizing himself on a shifting platform with his other hand. A feat that drew audible reactions from the Tetrite contingent, who understood better than most the physics of what they had just witnessed. When the simulation ended 4 minutes later, Jackson stood in the center of the course, surrounded by rescued victims, breathing hard but otherwise appearing remarkably composed. The silence that followed was profound. Emma's voice broke the spell. "As you can see, human reflexive responses can be channeled toward preservation rather than aggression. What you just witnessed was Commander Blackwood responding instinctively to protect others, not to attack a threat." Admiral Vkr'lak's compound eyes swiveled toward Captain Novak, who was watching the proceedings with undisguised satisfaction. "Impressive," the Admiral admitted, "though I fail to see how this addresses the Defense Council's concerns about unpredictable human combat reflexes." Alex's smile widened. "Oh, we're just getting started, Admiral. Lieutenant Torres, would you introduce the next demonstration?" Emma's voice returned over the announcement system. "For our next demonstration, we'll be showcasing human reflexive capabilities in medical emergency scenarios." A human the Admiral didn't recognize, wearing what appeared to be medical division insignia, entered the facility and approached a different section of the training area, this one set up with various medical simulation equipment. "Dr. Olivia Kaminsky will now demonstrate human reflexive diagnosis and treatment capabilities under extreme time constraints. Computer, initiate medical emergency simulation Delta, difficulty level 9. What followed was equally impressive in a completely different way. The simulation presented a series of medical emergencies occurring simultaneously. Simulated patients going into various forms of distress, diagnostic equipment flashing critical alerts, and treatment options appearing and disappearing on screens around the doctor. Dr. Kaminsky moved with the same uncanny speed and precision Jackson had displayed, but her movements were focused on diagnostic interfaces and treatment protocols. Her hands seemed to know where to go before the emergencies fully manifested, catching failing vital signs and administering countermeasures with a speed that left the Eldarin medical observers visibly impressed. When the simulation concluded, Emma explained, "Human medical practitioners often develop what we call clinical reflexes, the ability to respond to patient distress before conscious processing is complete. This same reflexive capability that causes us to occasionally overreact in perceived combat situations
Allows our medical personnel to save lives when seconds matter. Admiral Zakhtar's antennae twitched thoughtfully. The demonstration was certainly making a point, though he wasn't entirely sure what Captain Novak's endgame might be.
The demonstrations continued, each showcasing human reflexive capabilities in different non-combat scenarios. Emergency piloting, disaster containment, even performative arts where human dancers demonstrated reflexive coordination that allowed for complex synchronization without verbal communication.
Finally, as the last demonstration concluded, Captain Novak stepped into the center of the facility. "Honored representatives of the Confederated Systems," she began, her voice carrying easily through the chamber. "What you've witnessed today is not a defense of human reflexive capabilities, but rather a demonstration of their purpose." She gestured to the various simulation areas. "Our reflexes didn't evolve to make us fighters. They evolved to make us survivors. And not just individual survivors, but collective ones." The captain began to pace slowly, making eye contact with various alien dignitaries. "When a human sees someone falling, we don't calculate whether catching them is physically possible. We just try. When we perceive a threat to others, we don't conduct a risk assessment. We intervene. Our reflexes bypass our conscious minds because sometimes thinking is too slow when survival is on the line." She stopped in front of the Defense Council representatives. "You've been trying to understand our reflexes as weapons. They're not. They're tools. Tools for preservation, for protection, for survival. And yes, sometimes that means tackling assassins or accidentally dislocating mandibles when startled out of a sound sleep. But more often, it means catching someone who's falling, pulling someone back from danger, or responding to a crisis before it's fully manifested." Admiral Zakhtar found himself unexpectedly moved by the captain's words. There was something profoundly alien yet undeniably admirable about the concept she was articulating. "The Confederacy has classified species based on their evolutionary paths for centuries," Alex continued. "Predator species, hive species, philosopher species, logic species, neat categories that help us understand each other. But humans don't fit neatly into any of those boxes because our evolution took a different path. We became the species that reflexively preserves not just ourselves but others, even those who aren't like us." She smiled, a warm, genuine expression that somehow conveyed more than her words. "So yes, we're jumpy. We occasionally overreact. We might punch a Vkr'lak combat master when startled. But those same reflexes make us uniquely qualified for certain roles within the Confederacy that no other species can fill quite the same way." The captain gestured to her fellow humans who had participated in the demonstrations. "We're not asking you to ignore the potential risks our reflexes might pose. We're asking you to see them for what they truly are. Not weapons, but survival tools that we're offering to share with our new allies." The silence that followed was different from the earlier ones, contemplative rather than shocked. Finally, it was broken by an unexpected source. Combat Master Vkr'lak, his mandible still showing signs of the recent reconstruction, stepped forward from among the Vkr'lak contingent. "Captain Novak," he said, his translator rendering his clicking speech into the common tongue. "I have studied combat techniques of 17 sentient species across the Confederacy. In all my cycles of training, I have never encountered reflexes like yours." Alex tensed slightly, unsure where this was heading. "It is humbling," the Vkr'lak continued, "to be bested not by superior technique or strength, but by an autonomic response Lieutenant Torres could neither control nor suppress. More humbling still to realize that this response exists not for conquest, but for preservation." The combat master turned to address the Defense Council directly. "As the one who perhaps has the most legitimate grievance against human reflexive capabilities," he said with a gesture toward his healing mandible that drew a ripple of appreciative clicks from his fellow Vkr'lak, "I submit that we would be fools to view them as a threat rather than an asset." Emma, who had joined the group in the center of the facility, looked like she might spontaneously combust from embarrassment. "Again, I am really sorry about your mandible," she told the combat master. To everyone's surprise, Vkr'lak made a sound that his translator rendered as laughter. "Lieutenant, had our positions been reversed, I would have killed you entirely by reflex. The fact that you merely dislocated my mandible speaks volumes about your species' evolutionary priorities." Admiral Zakhtar stepped forward, his compound eyes fixed on Captain Novak. "An impressive demonstration, Captain, and a persuasive argument. But it doesn't entirely address the unpredictability factor that concerns the Defense Council." Alex nodded. "Fair point, Admiral.
Which is why we're proposing a compromise. A human reflexive response training program, developed jointly with Confederated experts, to help channel our reflexes more consistently toward constructive applications while minimizing adverse incidents. She grinned suddenly. Plus, we'll implement a simple protocol. Don't startle the humans, and maybe don't schedule us for diplomatic functions when we've been awake for 19 hours straight. This drew surprised laughter from several of the alien dignitaries, including, to everyone's shock, one of the typically stone-faced Tetrite representatives.
A reasonable accommodation, the Admiral conceded, his vocal patterns conveying amusement despite his translator's flat rendering.
I believe the Defense Council may find this approach satisfactory. 3 months later, Alexandra Novak, now Major Novak following her promotion to head the newly established Human Reflexive Response Division, found herself once again in Admiral Vkr'lak's office.
The preliminary results from the joint training program are quite remarkable, the Admiral was saying, reviewing the data on his display. 17 successful emergency interventions, 3 prevented diplomatic incidents, and only 1 minor mandible dislocation, which I'm told was actually appreciated by the Vkr'lakian ambassador as a refreshingly direct form of cultural exchange. Alex chuckled. The Vkr'lakians have been surprisingly enthusiastic about the whole program. I think they respect reflex responses more than calculated ones. Something about the honesty of instinct versus the potential deception of thought.
A fascinating perspective, the Admiral agreed.
Though I must admit, I'm still occasionally startled by how quickly your species can move when motivated.
Just be thankful you're seeing our reflexes in a controlled environment, Alex replied with a smirk. You should see what happens when someone unexpectedly turns off the hot water in the shower. The Admiral's color pattern shifted in what Alex had come to recognize as genuine amusement. A scenario I hope never to witness, Major. After a moment of comfortable silence, the Admiral's tone grew more serious. There is one matter I've been meaning to ask you about regarding your original incident. The assassin tackle? Alex asked. What about it? The security footage shows that you began your movement approximately 0.73 seconds before the Vkr'lakian assassin's poison gland visibly swelled. The Admiral's compound eyes fixed on her with scientific curiosity.
How did you know? Alex frowned slightly.
I didn't, not consciously. I just felt something was wrong. It's hard to explain. Try if you would, the Admiral encouraged. She considered for a moment. It was like a pattern recognition that happens below the level of conscious thought. The way he shifted his weight, the angle of his head, the fact that he'd positioned himself with a clear line to the ambassador despite there being more comfortable positions available. She shrugged. I didn't think about any of that at the time, I just knew. Fascinating, the Admiral murmured. So your reflexes respond not just to immediate physical threats, but to pattern recognition of potential future threats? I guess so. We call it intuition or gut feeling. But yeah, it's probably just unconscious pattern recognition built from experience. The Admiral made a notation in his report. This may explain why your species developed such complex social structures despite your predatory capabilities. Your reflexive responses are fundamentally oriented toward collective preservation rather than individual aggression. Alex smiled. I never thought of it that way, but it makes sense. Humans are weird that way. We're simultaneously the species that invented nuclear weapons and the species that will reflexively dive into freezing water to save a complete stranger. A puzzling contradiction, the Admiral agreed. Not really, Alex replied with a shrug. Both come from the same place, our obsession with survival. The difference is just whether we're thinking about it or reacting to it. Admiral Vkr'lak considered this for a moment, then closed his report with a gesture that translated across species as finality. Well, Major Novak, I believe we can officially consider the human reflexive threat assessment closed. Your species' unusual capabilities have been reclassified as a specialized adaptational trait rather than an autonomous threat response. Glad to hear it, Alex said, rising to her feet. Does this mean we can finally stop having to wear those ridiculous, caution-startling may-cause reflexive response badges on diplomatic missions? They're not exactly subtle. The Admiral's color patterns shifted in what might have been embarrassment. The badges were actually the Eldarin ambassador's idea. They find your reflexes particularly alarming. Fair enough, Alex conceded.
Though I still think it's a bit rich coming from a species that involuntarily releases hallucinogenic spores when surprised. A valid point, the Admiral acknowledged, his translator struggling to convey the dry humor in his clicking response.
Perhaps a mutual reduction in alarming biological responses is in order. As Alex turned to leave, the Admiral added, "Oh, and Major, the Defense Council has approved your proposal for the Joint Emergency Response Unit. Training begins next cycle." Alex grinned. "Perfect. I'll let Lieutenant Torres know she's been selected as lead trainer." "Is that wise?" the Admiral asked. "Given her history with Combat Master Vkr'lak?" "Absolutely," Alex replied with a mischievous glint in her eye. "They've actually developed quite the mutual respect. Besides, there's no one better to teach aliens about human reflexes than someone who's already demonstrated them so effectively." As she left the Admiral's office, Alex couldn't help but smile at how far they'd come. From being classified as a potential threat species, to establishing a specialized division that utilized their unique capabilities. All because humans couldn't help but jump when startled. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. In the training facility the following week, Lieutenant Emma Torres stood before a mixed group of human and alien trainees, trying not to focus too much on the fact that Combat Master Vkr'lak was observing from the sidelines, his reconstructed mandible now fully healed. "The first thing you need to understand about human reflexes," she began, "is that they're not perfect. They're not weapons. They're not superpowers. And they're definitely not always helpful. They're evolutionary shortcuts designed to keep us alive in a world that was constantly trying to kill us." She paced in front of the group, making eye contact with each trainee. "But when properly channeled, they can be the difference between life and death in a crisis situation. And that's what this program is all about, learning to channel reflexive responses toward constructive outcomes." A young Zakanari trainee raised an appendage. "Lieutenant, is it true that human reflexes can activate before conscious awareness of a threat?" Emma nodded. "Absolutely. Our spinal cord can actually process and respond to certain stimuli before the signal ever reaches our brain. It's called a spinal reflex arc, and it evolved to give us precious milliseconds of advantage when facing predators." "Fascinating," the Zaknari replied, its color patterns shifting with scientific curiosity. "And can this be trained? Directed?" "To an extent," Emma answered honestly. "We can't eliminate the reflex itself, but we can train ourselves to channel where it goes. That's what we'll be practicing here." From the observation area, Vkr'lak clicked something that his translator rendered as, "Just be grateful she is teaching you to channel it constructively. My mandible can attest to the alternative." This drew laughter from the assembled trainees and a flush of embarrassment from Emma. "Yes, well, that's exactly the kind of scenario we're trying to avoid repeating." As the training session progressed, Emma found herself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought them here. From being seen as unpredictable threats to becoming valued members of specialized response teams. All because humans couldn't quite control their tendency to punch first and think later. There was something profoundly amusing about the fact that the very trait that had made other species wary of humans was now being actively cultivated as a unique contribution to the Confederacy. Perhaps, she mused as she demonstrated a reflexive stabilization technique to an attentive Eldaran trainee. That was the real lesson here. That what makes a species different isn't necessarily a weakness or a threat. Sometimes it's precisely what makes them valuable. "All right," she called out to the trainees. "Now we're going to practice emergency response scenarios. Remember, the goal isn't to suppress your reflexes, but to direct them. Response, not reaction." As the training facility reconfigured itself into a simulation environment, Emma caught Combat Master Vkr'lak's eye, or the nearest equivalent in Vkr'lakian physiology. The Combat Master made a gesture that needed no translation across species barriers. Respect. Emma returned the gesture with a smile. Who would have thought that accidentally dislocating an alien's mandible would lead to greater interspecies understanding? Only humans, she supposed, could stumble so awkwardly into diplomatic progress. But then, as Captain, now Major Novak liked to say, that was kind of their specialty, reflexively stumbling into progress while apologizing for the mess they made along the way.